Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Hello and welcome to Cash Plays. I want to welcome everyone who may be listening to this podcast for the very first time. Yes, it is here, a conversation with Brian Townsend. Brian will be joining me in the second segment of the show, and I look forward to his interview very much. I'm actually going to travel up to Santa Barbara tomorrow and hopefully pick the mind of one of the great poker thinkers out there. As always, you can email us at cashplays@pokerroad.com, and you can also leave a voicemail, 877-836-ROAD, 877-836-ROAD. We had a nice voicemail from a gentleman from Brazil last week, so I want to encourage you all to do that. And I'm actually going to follow up on some of the draw concepts that we talked about a little bit on the last episode of this show. Got a lot of response about how to play big draws, what to do in certain types of situations, so I'm going to go ahead and elaborate on that more. I have just come off of my biggest winning week ever, and I have been playing poker full-time since just about the end of 04, no limit since the beginning of 06. And when all was said and done, I played exclusively 510. I played 3 days at the Bike and 2 days at Hustler, funny enough, because I do that radio show at worldseriesofpoker.com, and that's over by LAX, and I wanted to check the Hustler game out, which is a 510, 500 min, 2,500 cap game. It was a really good game. And I ended up a $20,000 winner for the week. And most of that was due to one night, 2 nights ago, where over a 7-hour session at 510 no limit at the Bike, I won $15,300, starting with $2,500. And, a lot of my success really, I think I want to attribute to kind of a lifestyle change. I've pretty much stopped drinking on days that I'm playing or days that I'm not going out. I have a bit of an addictive personality, and I kind of find it hard to do things in moderation, and I really wanted to go on a health kick. And I have been working out at the gym pretty much nonstop, and I've been dieting, and physically I just feel absolutely great. I mean, it is amazing, what just physical wellness can do to your mental state. And it feels like I've been playing the best poker I have ever played in my life. And a lot of that has to do with the fact of doing this show, having that conversation with Simolius, which is one of the reasons why I'm so looking forward to talking with Brian tomorrow. I mean, just to be able to interview and talk to some of the great poker minds really helps me with my own game. I've also, made some pretty good friendships with some of the big winners over at Commerce at the 10, 20, and 2040 level. And just talking through hands and being that environment has really, really helped me out. And I just feel like I'm in the zone. And that's part of the other reason, too. I've really kept it to business these last couple weeks. I'm really trying to build up a bankroll, a bigger bankroll for Vegas. And I've been playing a lot. Normally I wouldn't play more than 30 hours a week, but right now it's just, I think winning begets winning. And, if you're playing with confidence, it's really the best time to put in the most hours. And that's what we talk about a lot on the show, positive EV hours. The interesting thing about that night when I won $15,000 was, one of the hands that got me up right off the bat was, I'd started off with 2,500, and I think I was up maybe 1,300 for the day so far. A couple hours into the session, and I called the guy's mid-position raise to 55, I think, with 6-7 suited. And a guy in the button made it 200 straight, and it went call from up front, and the original raiser also called. And the guy in the button I think he had about 3,500. So, speculative for me to call their heads up, but with all those, extra players in there and with the dead money, plus I didn't know the guy, so I don't give him much credit. I went on to call with 6-7 suited, and the board had come out 6-6-4. And if you don't believe me about how good live games are, just listen to this action. So it comes out 6-6-4, and the pot's $800. I decide to check over to the guy, just mix up the line a little bit. It's not a draw heavy board. He bets 200. A guy in the blind, who I think had about 2,100 to start the hand, called, and I check raised it up, I think to 700 or 800. The original preflop raiser called behind me, and now the guy in the blind shoved. And I was like, oh, wow, I've just got to be beat here. I mean, you get smooth call of the initial bet, I check raise, an overcall, and now a shove. He's got to pretty much have pocket fours here in this spot. The guy in the blind, he's not a great player, not a total idiot. And I just didn't think with his stack size that he would call there with the 6 being the initial preflop re-raiser. So what ended up happening was when he shoved, I was getting about 3.2 to 1 in the pot. I started thinking about, obviously, his hand range. And, I didn't know it 100%, but with specifically 4-4, fours full there, 6-6-4, I really thought I had some equity. And I actually went home and stoved it, and it was true. 73 to 27 there with an under full against my 7-6. And I really didn't think he had a better 6. And even if he had a better 6, I think that the range of him having a better 6 is just about the same of him possibly having a worse 6 or some other hand that I beat. So I thought that was kind of balanced each other out on those sides, kind of EV neutral with those range, and it was really specifically an under full issue. And again, I had equity. So I called, and the guy overcalled behind me. It went, he raised it pre-flop, check bet, call, check raise, call, shove from the blinds, call, and the guy overcalled, and he still has like 1,500 left on the side, turns a blank, I shove, he calls with 2 aces. River quads me up, gives me a 6, and I take down a big pot there, which brought me up to, 8,500. I worked my stack up to 10,000, and if anybody had watched live at the bike, Corporation Mike, well, we were playing over in the main game, and Mike loves to gamble, he loves action, he's got a ton of money, he runs the corporation in the Asian side. Which basically covers all the blackjack bets. And he said, Bart, I want to give you a gamble. We were betting on red and black. So if a flop comes out, I had black. So if it comes out 2 black, I get $25. And if it comes out 2 reds, he gets $25. He says, I will give you 2,500 to 2,000 on the next hand. He had red, so he's laying 2,500 to 2,000. It's just a bet that I can't. I mean, I don't usually make prop bets, but it's a bet that I can't turn down. I have enough money to make that bet. I tell him that we can't play the hand because I know he was going to manipulate the hand so that if he had 2 red cards, he was probably going to raise it up. So I said, don't play the hand. So we did it. And I lost, of course, right? And I don't know, an hour goes by later. We did one more where he laid me 400 to 300, which, of course, was even better odds. I lost again. So to make a long story short, I have 8,500 in front of me instead of the 10,500 I should have in front of me. And I made a very, very loose call against a guy where a mid-position raiser had opened, and I flat called with 2 black queens for 65, and it went 4 or 5 callers behind me. And this kid, who was an absolute maniac, who had me covered for 10,000, limp re-raised to 1,000. And this is really where I thought my live experience, part of the reason why I continued on with the hand, because I really thought I could read this kid well. And I saw him play a hand like this earlier, the day before, and saw him make what was kind of a weak continuation bet when he didn't have anything. And I thought that a fair amount of the time I really could have had the best hand. There's been so much discussion around the casino. Well, if you thought they had best hand, why didn't you shove there with queens? Well, if he's going to call with ace-king, do I want to make that gamble? Obviously, I can't just peel for set value. I'm just not deep enough to make 1,000. I've got 7,500 behind. But I really thought that in position, I could play the hand and see where I was at with what action, when he was first to act after the flop. So I made a call, which, could have been a slightly spewy call, and the board came out queen 10-8 with 2 diamonds. He led for 2,500. Talk about a lack of pot control. Into a $2,000 pot. I shoved, he thought for a couple seconds, and called with 2 kings. And I ended up scooping what is the biggest pot I've ever seen at the bike at the 510 level. Somewhere around $18,000 or $19,000 pot at the end of the night. Unbelievable. But the sick thing about that is that it should have been a bigger pot, because I lost that damn prop bet to Corporation Mike for $2,000 or red and black. I mean, when am I ever going to think that when I'm sitting with $8,000 in a 5-10 game that $2,000 is going to come into play against another stack because I took that money out of my stack and gave it to Mike instead of taking it out of my pocket? Unbelievable. Well, I guess lesson learned. Other things are going on. I actually have to find a place in Vegas to live. I've been looking around. I'm going to live with a buddy of mine, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath place, and I don't know. I just haven't seen anything that's really out there. I'd love to find a place like the Panorama Towers. I stayed in Barry Greenstein's condo there during Bellagio 5 Diamond, I think in November. And I'd love to find something else. The other issue I'm having, too, is that last year when I had my success at the World Series, I gave this guy, a buddy of mine, a really great deal. I sold my action at cost, at price, at 50%, which basically I put up 50%, he put up 50%, and I gave him 50% of the gross with own tax liability, which was just a great deal. I don't think this guy is really interested, even though I made money, interested in backing people this year, but I need to find people actually to sell my action to. And, I was speaking with Havad Khan about this at Foxwoods. And Havad Khan he's just a super nice guy. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that's always talked about him and his antics, but if you get to know the guy, just a great guy. I played with him in a $1,000 one table at Foxwoods, and then we played all of day one of the main event next to each other. And he was telling me that I should bring a resume and that people will be looking to buy action there. And I'd like a little bit better of a deal than just selling myself at face because I'm doing all the work. But, I need to find some people actually to sell my action off. And I did make some endgame mistakes last year. I mean, I ended up making 2 final tables, got like 110th in the main event, cashed in the heads up. But, definitely think I have a handle on a lot of the events. So, if anybody has any ideas as to what I can do, or just, it's totally foreign to me. I've never really been backed with a makeup deal, and I would only be doing it for the World Series, so I don't really think that would, in my case, be, what someone would be looking for. But selling my action at a small premium, I think works for both parties. So if anyone has any suggestions or any interests, again, you could email cashplays@pokerroad.com. And again, man, like I said, I'm just feeling great. Physically, mentally, everything. Talk about a difference between a downswing I had at the LAPC and where I'm at now. With the show, with poker, just with life in general, just totally new way to look at the game. So let's elaborate here on draws, which was part of a long segment that we had in last episode. And I got an email here. And this was just kind of representative of, a lot of emails that I've gotten over the last week. And this email comes from John. He says, I was playing 1-3 no limit when under the gun opened for $12. I was on the button with 4-5 of spades. Everyone else folded. Flop came 6-7 queen with 2 spades. The original raiser bet 20. I made it 75. He moved all in for 140, and I called. I bricked out and lost the pot. He says, I don't think I played this hand badly, but my question is, could I have just flat called his bet of $20? I was pretty sure I was a favorite on the flop, but how much does that really matter on a drawing hand? Thanks a lot. Love the show. Well, thank you for the email, John. And, again, very, very interesting stuff when we look at how to play draws in position and what lines to take. Now, if you're specifically, again, against an overpair here, and you have a 15-out draw, you're going to be a favorite. You're going to be a 55 to 45 favorite. But what I want everybody to take out of last week's show is, again, playing the line that maximizes your fold equity. Now, in this case, we can talk about 15-out draws because it's unique because you're a favorite. And if you're a favorite, you don't mind getting the money in 55-45. Now, there are some times when you might not want to take a small edge because you don't have any more money left and you're in a really good game. Or if you lose the pot, you know yourself and you know that you're going to put in negative EV hours later on after you lose that pot. But let me give you another example here. This has to do with 14-out draws or less. Because a 14-out draw, you're normally 50-50-ish, really, really close. 12 and 13-out draws, you're going to be a slight dog. let's say you're playing in a 5-5, 500 cap game with effective stacks of $600, and the under the gun raises to 35, and you get 4 callers, and you call with 4-5 of hearts, and the flop comes out 8-5 deuce with 2 hearts. Classic draw, pair and a flush draw, 14-out draw. The guy comes out and he bets $150. What do you do? This is the issue that, again, I think is most misunderstood, especially with people that play online in 6-max games. In 6-max games, I mean, taking in this example, if there's any hint of fold equity, then a push is correct because you're just about 50-50. Again, though, in live games where the hand ranges are so polarized, if this guy is an older gentleman and he plays really tight and he throws out an over pot size bet into 4 players, it's not even a hand range issue. 99.9999% of the time, he's got an overpair here, or he's got ace king of hearts, or something that he is going to stack off with. And again, it's not always the case, but in my experience in live games, when a guy who's not that aggressive, who plays pretty transparent, shoots out a gigantic bet on the flop, he is going to stack off in a capped game. So really the question becomes, do you shove there with no fold equity? And I think a better example too is, let's say that you had like a 12-out draw, like a flush draw and a gut shot, something like that. If he bets 150 into that pot, into a $120 pot, can a case sometimes be made to peel the call? Because remember, when you're pushing, there is no fold equity. So if you shove a 12-out draw, you're going to be a slight dog. There is no fold equity. But if he's betting 150 into a $120 pot, the total pot size now is 270, 150 to call. 12 outs, 45 unseen cards. That's about 1 chance in 3.75. You need to be laid 2.75 to 1 in the pot. So 270, $150, you're not quite getting the right price, but think of the implied odds later on. Because normally live players aren't just going to check fold in the capped game when the flush draw comes. You can bet a little bit on the turn and stack them off on the river. Whatever hidden draw that you hit, whether it's a pair and a flush draw or that gut shot or some other card that he doesn't see, you're going to stack them off there. So when there's no fold equity, I think that you can actually call and see a card because you're priced in. And then if you miss on the turn and he prices you out, now you can fold. The whole point of making a semi-bluff is that there has to be some fold equity. And when you look at the board texture of a low board from an upfront predictable under-the-gun raiser, that bet represents an overpair. I'll give you another example, and this kind of brings it back over to that queen 6-7 hand that I talked about with 4-5 suited. I will make the case that if a high Broadway card comes like a king or a queen, and the guy fires out a good-sized bet, I think that you can make a raise there. If the board came out like king 7-6 or king blank blank and you had a 12-out or a 13-out draw, I would shove there because I think that there's more fold equity. There's more likely that a guy will throw out a bet with queens on a king high board or jacks on a queen high board and not stack off, as opposed to throwing out a pot-sized bet on a ragged board where he obviously has an overpair and he's going to stack off. I'd hesitate to do it with an ace because if he's throwing out a bet, it's just interesting. It's something that I've observed, again, live playing the last 3 or 4 years. If a guy raises with pocket kings and an ace comes out, he's not necessarily going to throw out a bet there into 4 people. But if he raises with queens and a king comes out, he very might, well, and again, jacks when a queen comes out. So in those cases, because there is even just a hint of fold equity, I make a big push. But you've got to remember, with those marginal slight dog draws, like 12 or 13 out draws, with no fold equity, I make a case for calling and seeing what comes on the turn. And sometimes these guys are dumb, and if you've got a 12 out draw and he doesn't push all in on the turn, you still have odds to call. Remember, you only need 2.7 to 1 out of the pot, so if he's not making a pot-sized bet, you almost get true odds, plus the implied odds left of his stack. And we've talked about this before, too. One of the greatest mistakes that someone can make is with a big hand that they're going to stack off with. This guy throws 150 out in the flop and he's got 350 left. Well, all of a sudden you call. Now the pot's like, 420 and he's got 350 left. And now he bets 200 instead of shoving stack. So now the pot's 550, 200 to call. You're getting almost 3-1, and he's left himself such a small amount of his stack where he can never fold to your draw on the river if it comes in, which is something commonly seen. And again, with a 15-out draw and you want to take the edge and you're a slight favorite, by all means you can shove with no fold equity. Just recognize what type of player you are, where if you brick out, again, will that make you play worse? Will it make you play scared? Might you want to play it a little bit safe? And we talked about sometimes not taking small edges for correct reasons. But in these transparent live games, again, you definitely have to play your hand with a draw to maximize your fold equity. And if you find that there is no fold equity, like in this example, a 55-year-old guy throwing a huge bet out, he is going to stack off. He's not going to fold an overpair. It just doesn't work that way. Sometimes you can call. And again, the example last week was when a guy who wasn't the pre-flop raiser starts becoming active on a flop pot, like where you lead out at a pre-flop raiser and a guy in the middle raises before it gets to the pre-flop raiser, that guy is most likely going to stack off. So whenever anybody is indicating to you that, yes, here I'm raising, I'm going to stack off, you've got to figure out what you can do. And if there is no fold equity, I think there's obviously some case that can be made that you can just call. Again, emails, cashplays@pokerroad.com. Well, I'm excited. Right around the corner, we are going to have SB Rugby, ABBA, Brian Townsend, so stick around. We'll be right back here on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays. Previously on Poker Road Radio.
Now, how many of those 30 or 40 have you guys played so far?
It's some number less than one.
I'm going to go with zero. Is zero the correct answer?
There you go.
That's the one. Now, how many opportunities have you had, and we'll talk about the actual hand there in a minute, but how many opportunities have you had since then to talk to Phil about arranging these matches?
I mean, I don't really want to be an asshole, and it seems like he doesn't want to do them, so...
Well, you could have fooled me from that soundbite right there.
You're kidding. You're telling me that Phil Hellmuth has talked some shit he can't back up? Are you kidding? This does not... You must be joking, man.
I have water in my mouth, and I almost spit it all over your electronics. Yeah, that's not cool.
Don't miss a moment. Tune in to Poker Road Radio and get all the action from the tournament circuit. Cash Plays.
And we are back here on Cash Plays. I have made the trip up to Santa Barbara, and I am in Brian Townsend's lovely house for the second time, overlooking the Pacific Ocean here. Thanks for coming on the show, Brian.
Hey, thanks for coming up, Bart. I appreciate it.
So, there's so much stuff that, and I'd love to talk to you about, and we're going to get into some, real good cash game discussion here. But I first want to start off because I think it would be... wouldn't be appropriate for me not to mention Card Runners, the recent Full Tilt arrangement, and Lee Jones. Can you discuss those things?
Yeah, so I guess to start with the Full Tilt, we recently signed a agreement with Full Tilt, which will hopefully bring more top professionals to our site, particularly multi-table tournament professionals, to really improve our content there. And we have a cross-promotional deal with them in terms of advertising and things. And they gave us some funding to go out and get some top MTT talent, which I'm really excited about. And we have some big names that we're going to be launching in the next couple months.
And, Lee Jones just coming on, obviously, he worked with Poker Stars, EPT host, was doing commentary. What is he going to add to your organization?
I mean, Lee is just a phenomenal addition. His book was the first one that I read in poker, and I mean, to think that we would even have the opportunity to bring Leon even as little as 6 months ago is just unbelievable to me, and I'm just kind of shocked that we actually could pull it together and that he would be interested. And he's really going to be working on a number of things. One would be improving quality of videos and things. He's really going to be monitoring a lot of the lower stakes pros, making sure that all their videos have direction and that there's kind of something that these pros are looking to teach in each and every video. He's also going to be doing some operations type things, so some bigger picture business end type stuff, behind the scenes running the business, which actually is a much, much larger job than it appears from the outside. And also he'll be adding some strategy. He's a top player and one of the great teachers of the game, so he'll definitely be doing some content like that.
And let's talk a little bit about what makes a good poker training site, what differentiates Card Runners from some of the rest of them, because now there's 4, 5, 6 different sites out there. I mean, what are you looking at as one of the main partners in Card Runners? What are you looking at to get out of some of your lower limit pros when they make videos?
I think having a specified plan of a video, a pro who goes in and just kind of wings a video usually doesn't turn out with a great result. So we really look for somebody who actually plays the games for one, because I think that's very important. When you ask me to go play 25-cent, 50-cent no limit, well, I might not be the best person in the world to teach it because it's been a while since I played those games. I think the mid-stakes games I would be comfortable doing, but some of the smaller stuff, we want people who are big winners. So we really look for people who are big winners in those games, who are very articulate, and who have kind of lesson plans and kind of flow for a video.
One of the things that I think I saw in your blog that I found interesting was the plan to actually make a limit hold'em video for people that are well versed in no limit hold'em.
Yeah. So Mike Schneider, our top limit pro, and I actually made a limit video, which was absolutely mind-blowing for me. I mean, some of the things he had me doing just did not. I mean, they were just so not what I was used to, because coming from a no limit hold'em background, or I guess even more generally a big bet poker background versus a limit background. Some of the peels he would have me do on the flop, where I'd be calling bets on the flop with, jack high on just boards with an overcard, things that I never would have done just because, he quickly saw that I had a backdoor straight draw, a backdoor flush draw, things like that gave me enough equity to continue in the pot.
And one of the other things, too, is I read in your blog was, with all of these training videos out there, at the 1-2, at the 2-4 limit, and I'm talking about no limit specifically, and higher, is it pretty much now a requirement for any good player to be pretty well-versed in what's out there in terms of training videos? Because you even said that you were a little rusty at 25-50, and we're now watching some of your own pros' videos. So I kind of want to know, how has that helped you, and how has making your own videos helped your game?
Well, I think making your own videos makes you think about things that you would never think about. I mean, at times you're playing and you're kind of going through the motions, but when you actually have to articulate what you're doing, can really help improve. I've been playing more 25-50 no limit, because that's the biggest game that's running right now, just to kind of keep myself fresh and keep making sure that I'm well in tune with the games that I'm going to be talking about and coaching about, because I think that's very important, because sometimes you get that disconnect where you aren't playing the games that you're playing, and it's very important to still be playing them. So all the Card Runners pros spend time playing in those games that they're going to be coaching.
And I want to get into some strategy issues now, because recently I was thrilled to have an interview with Simolius, who came on the show a couple weeks ago, Pinkity on PokerStars. It was Neiman, and it was funny because one of the first things that he said, because I asked him about training videos, was that he didn't really agree with some of the aggressive stylistic teachings of Card Runners. And the example that he gave me was 3-betting with hands that play well, raise size to stack size, like suited connectors. He said that most of the time in these types of situations, he likes to 3-bet with some of his weaker hands, like offshoot Broadway and stuff like that. What's your take on that? Those types of hands.
Yeah. So, well, for one, I think he has a very different style, and I think that's what makes Card Runners so great. I mean, you look at my style, you look at Taylor's style, you look at Cole South's style, you look at Brian Hastings' style, you look at any pro style Eric Liu. They're all very different. Some of us, like myself, I would say I'm more straightforward, tight, solid, aggressive player. Somebody like Cole's much more loose and aggressive. And I think taking all those styles and combining them together can create your own player. I mean, I know that's what I did. I watched all these videos when I was coming up, and I took little bits from each one. And I wasn't like any player that I played with. And in that way, it's been a while since I played with Samuelis, but when I did, I remember him having a very unique style, very different than anyone I had ever played against. Very small raises pre-flop, would play a lot more hands than most people, not very aggressive post-flop or pre-flop. You know, he wouldn't be 3-betting a whole lot. I mean, he would definitely some, because that's what you have to do to be a winner, I think, in any situation, but not nearly as much as some of the other top players. And so, you know, his style is very different. As for his comment on the Broadway suited connector issue, well, I mean, it kind of comes down to the opponents you're playing. Why I would counter that isn't a good argument would be that, okay, if you have a small suited connector hand, when the flop comes ace, 7, deuce, and you have 5, 6 suited, and you bet and you get raised, well, right there you can decide, okay, I know I don't have the best hand. I can either try to rebluff this guy, or I can fold. I mean, you know pretty darn well that you don't have the best hand with 6 high. Now, to counter that, what happens when you 3-bet somebody with ace 10 offsuit, and the flop comes ace 7, 3? You bet, you get raised. Well, now what do you do there? Is he raising you with ace queen, ace king, ace jack? Or does he have a set? Is he on a pure bluff? I mean, it kind of puts you in a weird situation where you don't know if you have the best hand. You have a pretty good made hand, but you don't really know where you are. So that's why I would counter that 3-betting with those ace 10 hands aren't the best. But then again, that all changes when, you know, let's say I was playing somebody who I know has that style, who is 3-betting with suited connectors, big pocket pairs, or ace king. Well, then I can figure out their range is either suited connectors or, like, say the flop comes ace high. I'll know they'll either have ace king, a set of aces, or kind of an air suited connectors, or like jacks through kings when they bet the flop. So I can raise them. I'm not really articulating what I'm trying to say well, but I can raise them, and I'll know if I get called, well, they're going to have a hand there. Right. Whereas with his style now, he might just call that flop raise with the ace 10 and check fold the turn, saying, okay, now that he's fired the turn, I know my ace 10's no good, type of thing. So I guess what I'm saying is his style does have merits against some high-level thinking players, but I think as a standard against most opponents that you would face, it's much better to polarize your range to big hands, you know, jacks through aces, ace king, ace queen type stuff, and suited connectors.
You know, I did a segment on the show last week talking about sometimes being way ahead or way behind, specifically on the turn a lot of times. But something that I've noticed in my own game, which has improved the last couple months, is my ability to check back on the flop with what I would say were good hands, but non-nut hands, as a combination of pot control, trying to extract value from, say, you know, a weaker hand. Can you just discuss a little bit about checking back with second pair, top pair, weak kicker, and those types of issues?
So let's say that you raised from the cutoff, and you raised with ace deuce offsuit or something, or ace deuce suited. Flop comes ace 7, 3 rainbow, so you have top pair, no kicker. Now, this is a great spot to check behind because, one, well, let me say, against non-top level thinking opponents, it can be a very good spot to check behind. Some top level opponents will then know that you're never slow playing a monster hand and will really put a lot of pressure on you with overbets and stuff. So you need to use different strategies against them. But against your normal player at 25-50 and down, I think the game's kind of change at that 25-50 level a little bit, where you get some really great players. You don't really have to worry too much about that. So that's a great flop to check behind for a couple reasons. If he's sitting there with king-queen, you don't want him to fold. You want him to catch a king-queen on the turn, and so you can extract a bet out of him. It's one of those situations where your equity is either incredibly high, or you have almost, or you're drawing to like 3 outs at best. So that's a great example of a way ahead, way behind spot, and it's a good spot where checking the flop can actually help you extract value. I mean, you're almost slow playing in a way. I mean, yeah, you have a hand you can't call a raise with, but you're really trying to let him catch something else so that you can extract more value out of. But also at the same time, you're defending yourself from a flop check raise, because it's no fun getting check raised with ace deuce on a ace 7-3 rainbow board.
I think this is one of the concepts that I've struggled with a little bit too, because I was always a huge proponent, especially in the early days of No Limit, back in the Live of the Bike days, of fast playing your hand. So what I struggle with sometimes on the turn is if I have a hand like ace-jack on a jack-7 deuce board and I bet the flop and the guy calls, and I'm pretty sure that he's got a hand like 9s or 10s, and the turn comes to 3, checking the turn there to extract value with a river call from 9s and 10s, if I'm checking the turn there with ace-jack, do I need to also balance and check the turn there with a set of jacks, or do I lose too much value on the off chance that the guy's got a big hand?
Well, that really comes down to your opponents. Like I said before, most 25-50 and under opponents, there's a couple great ones who you have to, obviously at all levels, there's one or two great players that are going to pick up on that. But for the most part, that's not really something you have to worry about. Yes, obviously, to you it looks very transparent. I know there's times where I'm making plays and I'm like, gosh, I always have nothing here. But it's much harder to read when you can't see your own cards. That's the thing that you have to remember, that it might seem transparent to you. Well, that's because you're in your own mind. You're looking at your own hole cards. But yes, there is some concern of that balancing issue. One optional great line there to consider would be checking the turn and then raising the river as well. Because that comes to the point where very rarely, again, it's those really top flight players that are going to be 3-bet bluffing the river against you. It happens, but it's a very rare thing. So that's another option too to extract more value. Would be to check the turn because you're kind of pot controlling it, and then you can raise the river if they bet out.
Now, that's actually an interesting line because I haven't played all that much online, and it's never been really over 1, 2, 2, 4. Live 10, 20, No Limit's usually the game I play in. And a 3-bet bluff on the river is not something that I've seen very often, if at all. At what stakes do these types of moves start becoming, more regular?
I wouldn't say they're all that regular that often, but it's more the opponents you're playing against. I can think of quite a few opponents when they raise the river against me. I strongly consider calling with a lot of hands, or if they 3-bet bluff or 3-bet the river against me. And then there's some opponents, even at the highest games, where I just throw my hand away. I don't even think twice. So really that comes down to an opponent read. And the more you play with your opponents, the better you'll be able to determine. But I've found generally, maybe 50% of the opponents at 25-50 and up can do that, whereas maybe 1% at 25-50 and down, outside of the maniacs who are playing every hand and just being absolute nut jobs.
I want to talk a little bit of just generally about aggressive play versus passive play. Just from watching some of the videos at Card Runners, the style tends to be more of an aggressive style. Do you think that by putting pressure on your opponents, and this is a theoretical discussion, that you end up making what ends up, making more money, or you end up winning more pots, whereas just an aggressive style in general is just better than a passive style? Yeah,
if you go back to kind of the starting of poker, when Doyle Brunson, the first teacher, brought out the super system, that was his idea, was that he's picking up all these little pots because he's always stabbing, he's always playing aggressively. Some very few number of players can play a more passive approach and be successful with it. But it's a rare thing, and it's very hard to do because you're missing out on so many of these little pots that you're picking up. And that can be very frustrating for your opponents because they don't realize that they're losing pots. And I've been in that situation too, where I've been outplayed by a more aggressive opponent, and I'm not even realizing the amount of money that I'm losing by their aggression. If they're winning 60-65% of the pots, they're all small ones, and then I get it all in with them, and he has a draw and he's 30% to win and he hits, and I'm like, oh, I got so unlucky. Well, no, I didn't really get unlucky, because he was picking up all these little pots when he was moving all in with his draw before,
right?
Type of thing. So I think it can really confuse opponents, and opponents don't understand the big picture sometimes when you do it to them. So I think that's another reason why that aggressive play is best, and because of all those little pots that you're picking up, and it lets you disguise your made hands much more easily. I mean, there's some opponents I play against who call with draws, raise with made hands on the flop. That's all they do. And it's very easy to play against them. And to counter that, also, there's opponents who just raise with draws and just call with their big hands, and habitual slow players. And they're also very easy to play against. So I think it's having the combination where your opponents don't know. They don't know if you have the nut flush draw or if you have top set. And they're sitting there with 2 kings, and they can't profitably call against your range.
And this is interesting, too, because I want to bring a heads-up discussion into this as well. And I've watched some of your videos about heads-up where I think you've said that sometimes you're raising with as much as 80 or 85% of your range on the button.
Yeah.
And I want to bring Huckseed into this conversation because you played him at the NBC Heads-Up, right? And I had the opportunity to see all his cards in 3 matches in Canada, which was a similar style structure. And he played extremely passively.
Yes.
And he seemed to have had a lot of success heads up looking back through. Now, maybe the NBC one isn't the best sample because the stack sizes are so small.
Yeah.
But he almost plays, I don't know if you would call it a trap, checking, top pair, calling your continuation bets with top pair, and never really putting any type of pressure on his opponent and just kind of leaking them off. And I just kind of wanted to know what you thought of his style.
Well, yeah, that can definitely work if your opponents will habitually bluff at you on multiple streets. The problem with that is, I hate to say it, it's real hard to make top pair in poker. And, even when you do, it's not necessarily going to be the best hand. You're going to get extracted every single time when they have a better hand. That's what you have to remember also. Every time that they have a better, they're going to be putting in bets on every street, big ones too, that you'll be forced to call down. So I guess as far as his style, it can work in certain situations, and it should be used. I mean, there's definitely times where, you don't want to be aggressive. And a lot of people, I think, sometimes look at aggressive players and just think that they're off the deep end. They're just maniacs, and they're just doing these things. I mean, I've done that too. I've played opponents who get under my skin, and they do these raises, and it frustrates me.
Is Cole one of those guys?
Cole's definitely one. I mean, a lot of guys are. Yeah. Brian Hastings, when I play him, Eric Liu, Taylor, all these guys, they do it to me, and I do it to them, and that's a good thing. You want to do that. You want to frustrate your opponents, and using a style that doesn't do that. So there's also that added kind of tilt factor that can really. A lot of money's been won and lost when poker players go on tilt. I mean, there's some notorious players who lose all control, and nobody doesn't tilt completely. I mean, every time you get raised, it gets under you a little bit. When you bet the flop and you're getting raised all the time, it's frustrating, and it's annoying to play against.
One of the other things I want to talk to you about, and I think Barry Greenstein, he said this in his blog that 90% of the money that won and lost is through steaming and tilting. Yeah. I found it interesting that you're continuing to train for a triathlon. You look like a pretty fit guy. Mentally, how do you prepare for poker, and how important is it, do you think, and how important do you think it should be for others to keep physically well?
I think physical health is nearly as important. I mean, I think what you do away from the table is important, if not more important, than the play at the table. I mean, there are tons of players who are great poker players and who could cut it, but they'll never be professionals because they have emotional issues, drug issues, physical issues away from the table that just hinder them from having success at the table. And if you're not in a good focused mind, you're going to have a lot of trouble. I mean, when I first started playing poker, all I was doing was playing poker, and I was unhealthy just because I would sit at my computer all day. Now I have a lot more balance in my life, and that's been really great for all areas of my life instead of just trying to play all the time.
I don't know if you're buddies with a lot of guys that just play tournaments online. Maybe I think one of the bigger advantages for cash game guys, they can do whatever they want. But just going on tour with the Poker Road Radio the last few months, I mean, it seems to me like a lot of these guys, they just smoke pot and play poker. The guys who play tournaments, know. For you, just to stay physically active at those levels, it helps your concentration as well.
Oh, for sure. It definitely does. But then again, I have a much better setup than they do because I play cash games online. I can log on whenever I want from my house, whenever I want, pretty much make my own schedule. Well, not totally, because there's sometimes games that you really should be playing in because your edge is so large. But those are generally pretty rare. And, when you have an MTT to play that starts at noon, you got to be there, and you got to sit there all day long, till midnight or 2 a.m. or however long it goes. And it's very hard to stay active and stay fit. And you're in the casino, you have casino food. It's hard to be healthy.
When I asked people last week for questions to, email me questions to ask you, the most common question came up is, get Townsend to talk about downswings and variants. So I've got to ask you, let's get into a general discussion about, and there were 2 major downswings that at least the public knows about when you've written in your blogs over the last year. Mm-hmm. At what point do you have to re-examine your game when, when you start to see what you think might be just more than variance?
Mm-hmm. Do you mean like how many buy-ins do you have to lose before you start questioning yourself? Or?
Over your last 2 buy-ins, do you think that, over your last 2 downswings, do you think that it was solely variance, or did you have to go back and do some re-examining? I think you said you had lost 25 buy-ins in the big PLO games or something like that.
Yeah. That was quite a while ago. That was like a year and a half ago, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, when I did that, it was, I would say, if anything, I was a break-even player, maybe a marginal winner. Mm-hmm. And when you have a small win rate like that, you're going to experience 25 plus, 35, 40 buy-in swings. Mm-hmm. It's just going to happen. So yeah, you have to examine your game. You have to look at leaks, heads-up play. I was playing some heads-up against players who were stronger than me, and at first I didn't realize it. And it took me a while to re-examine the hands and say, okay, what's he doing? What's his strategy against me? Why am I losing? Okay, here's why, and identifying it. So it's hard to put a number on it. Mm-hmm. There's been times where I've been sitting with a player and I play like 50 hands. And I'm like, wow, this guy's going to kill me. Like, I just kind of get that feeling. Mm-hmm. But usually, that's kind of the tough part about poker. Usually you don't notice that for a very, very long time. It takes a long time to realize somebody's better than you.
Just
like if you're playing heads up against a player who has an edge on you.
And you just realize right away that this guy's just going to play better than I am.
Yeah, that happens rarely. Usually you lose, 30, 40 buy-ins, and I think everybody has a little ego in poker, thinking they're better than everybody. And the weird thing about poker is player A could beat player B. Player B could beat player C. But that does not mean player A could beat player C.
Right.
There's definitely not that transitive feature with poker because some styles, some subtle things work differently against other players that they have success against. So, all players who are playing above like 5,100 are all phenomenal players. When it comes down to it, there's some weak spots in the games, but generally you're going to be up against really top players. And the game's kind of changed from that 5,100 level and up. I kind of put that all in a category, and then like the kind of 10, 20, some of the 25, 50 games, they play differently. Some play like the 5,100 up are kind of in a category, and then the mid stakes and the small stakes. But to get back to your question, I guess like when I first started playing Limit, I was a loser there as well. I probably lost like 150K playing 300, 600 Limit on Cryptologic, and I would just be like, oh, I'm a good player, I'm doing the right things. And looking back now at what I know, I would say I can beat any 100, 200 limit game, probably some 200, 400s good lineups, and then above that they got to be real good lineups for me to be a winner. And I think what I look at what I know now, it's some of the things like blind defense, I just had no idea. I was playing like a no-limit player. So things like that, when you switch games, there's a lot of subtle nuances that you don't think exist that really do, that you really have to be aware of. I don't know if I quite answered.
Yeah, I think so. Well, let's talk about some common numbers because this always comes up too. Now, you went through the mid and low stakes before the online legislation, right? Mm-hmm. You were working your way up through there.
Yeah. So
if you were to say, if I were to put out there that say the 2-4 no limit is much tougher now than when it was when you were playing. Mm-hmm. So tougher mid-stakes games.
Yeah.
What do you think proper buy-in bankrolls are for, say, 6 max, heads up, and does that bankroll number exponentially increase as you move up in stakes?
I think it all comes down to the amount of risk you're willing to take. Mm-hmm. When I have a family, when I get married and have 2 kids, or I don't know, whatever, let's say 2 kids and a wife, my tolerance for risk is going to be much different than it would be when I was coming up and I was some college kid who just had this money online and wasn't using it for anything else. And it wasn't a big deal if I lost half my bankroll. It was like, so what? I just, whatever. So when I look at a guy like Brian Hastings, he had an amazing month, won like over $1 million, played aggressively. I think he'd admit it. He took some risks. Mm-hmm. And, he was a winner in all the games he was playing. I'm not saying that in any way. But, he did things that were a little risky in terms of he could have also lost quite a little bit of money.
Right.
But the thing is, he can always say, okay, well, I took my shot at 200, 400. Not my shot, but, I took this game at 200, 400, and it didn't go quite as well as I wanted. I'll just play 25, 50, 10, 20, for the next couple months and rebuild right back up, and I'm right back where I was. So if you're willing to move back down, which I think is really crucial, you should always be willing to scale down. Even if you have the bankroll to play a big game, let's say that you are Guy and can play, let's say that you were, infinitely rich and can play any game you want. If you want to be a professional player, you should be willing to scale back down when you're losing, regardless, because you want to be able to beat the games that you're playing. And a lot of times when you're losing, you might be a winning player overall, but you're in some type of tilt fashion, or you're not thinking clearly, and you're just not playing that well because you're kind of on a downswing, and the downswing kind of affects your play as well. So I think it's, as long as you're willing to scale back down, I think 20 buy-ins is more than enough.
20 buy-ins at
a limit is great spot to take a shot. If you're not a professional, you're not, paying your rent with the money, then I think that's a great spot. If you are, you should be a little more conservative. You should make sure that your nut is very low every month, and you should make sure that you can cover that easily. And then with the extra money, you should be looking at that to move back up with.
Now, what about buy-ins for heads-up play? Even at the lower, when you were playing at those limits, I don't even think that Full Tilt offered those heads-up tables like they do now. What about those buy-ins? Is it 30, 40?
Well, I, for one, would be very careful about playing heads-up below 2-4 no limit, just because the rake can be very high.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Like when they're taking 50 cents out and you're playing 25, 50 cent no limit, man, you have to have a big edge to beat somebody. So I never played heads-up until I got to the 25, 50 level. And at that point, the rake becomes less because it's still 50 cents. So you pay as much rake when you're playing 300, 600 heads up as you are when you're playing 25 cent, 50 cent, which, that's how Full Tilt is where they are. And so I would really actually stay away from heads up. There's really no reason to. The reason to play heads up is often because there aren't a whole lot of games when you get to the higher limits, and you can kind of extract value from players who are used to full ring or six-handed games if you can play them heads up, or you can get a weaker player and play them heads up. But at the lower limits, there's so many good games and tables that you can choose from. You look on these sites, and there's 100 across different sites, 50-cent dollar no limit tables. Well, some of them are going to be phenomenal, and you just have to find them. And there's no real reason to pay that much rake at those limits. So I would really stay away from playing heads up until you got to at least 5, 10, 10, 20. And in terms of buy-ins, it all comes back. If the weakest player in the world was sitting at 1 million, 2 million, well, I'd get everything, scrape it together, and go try to play. So if you're willing to scale down, and you're willing to, when you're losing or things aren't going well, even if you have money to continue playing the games you're playing, if you're smart enough to say, I'm going to step down for a little bit, I think that you should be very aggressive and take shots with 15 to 20 buy-ins even. And that's the best way to, prepare yourself for those games, is just to jump in there. And there'll be growing pains. There'll be times you lose. And that's, kind of part of poker.
One of the conversations or deep discussions, again, that we got into at Simoleous is playing super deep live and playing versus 100 big blinds deep. Now, that Vegas game that you were playing in last summer, what was it, 1,000, 2,000 the limit? And how deep usually were the stacks?
Anywhere from 50 big blinds to 500.
Okay.
Which is common live. I mean, it really runs the gambit. In all the live games I've played, you have people coming in for 50 big blinds, and you have some sitting there, other top professionals who want to cover the table.
I think that And then after Samolis, we had another guy on that just plays live, Fran C. And he talked about the advantage he thinks that he has over internet players because when they sit 500-600 big blinds deep, they're playing like they're still online playing 100 big blinds deep. I want to talk about a little bit about the difference when you sit that deep, what your strategical difference is, and could you possibly give examples of where you might be 3-betting and not 3-betting when you're that deep versus your standard 100 big blinds online?
Yeah.
Pre-flop I'm talking about.
Well, first, there's often times where you are playing that deep online. They have deep tables now on some sites where they have 200 blinds. But even beyond that, they have, you build up stacks pretty quickly usually. I mean, there's very often where I have 4 buy-ins in front of me, which is almost that deep. I mean, that happens regularly when I'm playing. So I wouldn't say that it almost never comes up online because you're playing so many more hands per hour that obviously the stacks are going to keep growing. So you do get those deep situations. But I guess so in terms of ways to adjust, pre-flop, it becomes much more player dependent. If somebody's going to fold 90% of their hands, I'll re-raise them with every single hand that they raise with. And if they're never going to adjust against me, I'm never going to change that. Now, if you're sitting there with 20 big blinds, well, you just can't do that because people will be forced to call because of pot odds and stuff. But if I know somebody's a very weak player and I can re-raise them and bet the flop and they'll fold every time they don't have a pair, well, then I'll raise every single hand and do that if they're never going to adjust against me and bluff raise me and things. So I think it becomes much more player dependent. The deeper the stacks get, the more it becomes about knowing your opponent and playing your opponent and being able to make bets and raises against your opponent. When the stacks are very shallow, you are more just have to kind of play by the numbers and say, okay, well, he opened with this number of hands from this position. I can re-raise with this number. So I think that's one major difference. What was the other?
Well, I guess my question is, do you come? I think some of these guys come to the school of thought when you're playing that deep that they like to try to keep the pot small pre-flop, that they'll flat with a lot of big hands like kings, aces, and other hands to see what comes out on the flop when you're playing that deep. I mean, do you agree with that school of thought?
Not really, because, well, for one, you shouldn't be willing when you re-raise once pre-flop to stack off on a, say the flop comes 7, 8, 9 monotone board and you have 2 black, it's all hearts and you have 2 black aces. Well, yeah, you're an idiot if you're putting all your money in there.
Right.
I mean, just because you're re-raising, I mean, and my thought is you want to extract value whenever you can, pretty much. Yeah, there's a time for slow playing, but across the board, you want to be betting and raising for value. That's how you make money in poker. And when you're not doing that, you're leaving money on the table. Just because you re-raise pre-flop with aces doesn't mean you have to bet every flop. Doesn't mean you have to stack off on every flop for a 1,000 big bet pot. So I think you should really have a wide range pre-flop and be looking to extract value. I think if anything else, the deeper the stacks get, the more I re-raise pre-flop, the more pressure I put on my opponents. And, against some opponents, I re-raise constantly the deeper the stacks get because it frustrates them and they have a lot of trouble playing against me out of position. Usually the deeper the stacks also, you want to be in position. So I really believe that you should be extracting value. That's what poker's all about. You want to make the most money, and the way to do that is to get money in the pot. Just because... okay, if you're a very tight, solid player and all you do is re-raise aces or kings, yes, you're going to be very easy to play against. But good players don't do that. They re-raise with a very wide range, which would include small pairs, suited connectors, and a lot of other hands. So they can pick up all those pots on the flop when they continuation bet and you fold. So I think, if anything, the deeper the stacks get, the bigger the pot you want to make pre-flop, if anything.
I guess that then begs the question, if you have a one-pair hand and you blow the pot up to a certain extent, can you get called by a weaker hand, which kind of leads into, like, when do you play in pot control? Because what I'm getting the vibe from you is you're more interested in extracting value than you're concerned for pot control. That big hand went down with Antonius and you in England, and I don't want to go over the specifics of the hand because it's been talked up ad nauseum, but that kind of reminded me just that it didn't seem like you were that scared to build up a big pot with one pair.
Well, so that's an interesting pot, and I think why that's interesting is because I didn't think he would play a set like that. Now, so at the time, So normally, obviously the river would be a very easy. If you're not familiar with the hand, you could probably look it up online. It's been talked about a lot. A river check raise there, obviously you throw away your hand every time.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, I felt like he's never playing a set like that. I'd never thought he would have a set. When he said set, I was like shocked. I never thought he would do that, play a hand that way, because I thought he would want to build the pot earlier. So he played the hand very deceptively, and he's a great player, and he extracted value from me. So
pot control versus overvaluing.
Okay, so
hand?
for one, that wasn't even a re-raise pot. That was a single raise pot.
Yeah.
So it was a little different. Yeah, definitely my standard there would be to check the turn.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt that he had a much weaker hand, and I was wrong. So there's not much. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, in terms of preflop, you should be looking to maximize your expectation and your value, and you do that by re-raising your good hands. I mean, that's where you make money in poker, is by re-raising with good hands. Why do you re-raise with ace king? Well, because it's ahead of your opponent's opening ranges. That's why. Mm-hmm. It's not because some people say it's a drawing hand. You don't have anything. Well, no. It's not because of that. You're extracting value.
So again, when people play deep and they continue with flat with big hands, they're obviously losing value.
Yeah,
right? When they're not re-raising with the best hand.
I mean, what are you looking for? Okay, let's say you flat call a raise, and the flop comes 5-3 deuce rainbow. Okay, does your opponent flop a set on you because he didn't fold it pre-flop to your re-raise? Is he there just with king queen? Okay, he bets the flop. The 5 pairs again, he bets again. You just call him down. I mean, then you're just playing that defensive, like, call poker. Mm-hmm. And that's can work when you have aces, but then it doesn't balance you when you don't have aces, and it can make it very obvious kind of what you have in a way.
Right.
I guess is kind of what my feelings are. So,
well, let's shift gears and let's talk some PLO. Mm-hmm. We got a ton of emails about PLO. One guy actually emailed in and wanted to know why, basically, that you walked away from the big no limit hold'em games, or you were playing exclusively no limit hold'ems, to hop into PLO because you thought that it was more profitable. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, some of your big downswings have come from PLO. Yeah. Talk about this. Talk about PLO. Is it a gambling game? Is the variance so high where I think there's been a discussion as can anybody really beat the biggest levels because the variance is so high?
Of course they can.
Mm-hmm.
And PLO is just like no limit hold'em. Yes, the variance is quite a bit higher. It's about twice as high based on the standard deviations in Poker Tracker, at least from what I've discussed with other top pros and what I've looked at my own stats. But it's the same game. Why do you re-raise preflop in PLO? Why do you repot if they're always going to call? Mm-hmm. Why do you re-raise and limit hold'em when they always are going to call you? Well, yes, they have odds to call because against your range they have above 33% equity, but you're still extracting value from them. So I think that's kind of goes back to the no limit hold'em concept, that you want to extract value with your big hands. And PLO is the same way. You have a big edge when you have double suited aces and you want to build the big pot. And to counter that, you need to be deceptive, with some rundown hands, maybe a 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, double suited type hand, to kind of counterbalance when you do have nice double suited aces. So really, you're trying to extract value. And that's kind of why PLO is an interesting game, because there's some aces that you don't want to re-raise with, because against your opponent's opening ranges, you're actually not a favorite, or you're maybe even money. Let's say you have ace, 7 deuce rainbow. You wouldn't want to repot that hand preflop because against your opponent's range, you might have like 55% equity or something like that. Probably more than that because they'll have aces in their hand, another ace in their hand, which you'll have dead quite a bit. But you're not really extracting a lot of value, whereas you would re-raise with, say, double-suited connected queens like queen, queen, jack, 10 double-suited, because against their range, you have 65, 60% equity, and you want to extract value from that. So it's really, all poker is very similar. There's a lot of nuances, a lot of subtleties, but really you're trying to extract value from your opponents, and you're trying to do it when you have more equity than they do in the pot.
One of the things that I've noticed in the bigger PLO games is a tendency for guys to come in short stack the game, go up a couple buy-ins, and it seems like that there's a hesitation even at the highest levels to play deep stack PLO. Is that just because of the nature of the game where the hand values just run so close that people don't want to gamble for that much money?
No, I think that is because people think that hand values run so close
Okay.
when there's a huge edge for these guys sitting there with 8K.
Yeah.
How nice is it when you have ace 7 deuce rainbow and you're sitting there with 8K, somebody opens to 14 and you can just, not quite, but almost go all in. Because then it's very profitable to push that 55% edge. Whereas when you're deeper, you don't really want to push a super small edge like that pre-flop because your hand plays so poorly post-flop. So that's why these guys are doing pretty well. You know, they're not doing amazing, but they're doing well, making a good amount of money by short stacking these games, is because people think that you can play 50% of your hands pre-flop because hands run so close in value, but that's just not the case.
So you don't hesitate at all to play when you get a deeper stack then? And PLO?
No, I mean, you have to make some adjustments, obviously. You don't want to build pots which don't have good equity, but no, I wouldn't maybe if there was a weird situation where there's a very good player with a deep stack to my left or two to my left who are repotting me a lot in position and just kind of making my life a pain, I might leave the table or something to try to get better position, but nothing where I would be afraid. No.
Again, we take emails on the show, and I got a couple emails here I want to get to. This is Ben. He says, Brian, I've noticed that people are starting to lead out at pots now instead of checking to the pre-flop raiser, and this is talking about PLO. This can get really annoying when you're missing flops, when there are people that act behind you, so it makes it hard to bluff raise him or call light. How do you deal with this type of play, people leading out now?
Well, first, bluff raising in multi-way pots is just not something you're doing a whole lot. I mean, when somebody leads into you and there's two people to left stack behind you and you don't have a strong draw or a strong made hand, really, there's just not much you can do. It won't be profitable to raise there. So I would first just be throwing my hands away. And yeah, it can be a very frustrating strategy when you're led into a lot with both made and weak hands. The thing that I find is generally, if somebody's leading a multi-way pot, they're going to have some type of hand. And it's not going to be profitable to bluff raise them. So I would just let those hands go. Now, when it's heads up, that's kind of a different ballgame. So essentially what they're trying to do is take away your aggression, take away the strength of the continuation bet from you by leading with both their big hands and their bluffs. So it's a good strategy in some spots, and it's kind of hard to counter, and there's not a great answer for it. You have to pick your spots to throw in bluff raises and try to pick drier flops where they can't re-semi-bluff you. You know, if there's a flush draw out there, maybe you don't want to try to semi-bluff him because you know he'll just jam in with a pair and a flush draw, or maybe even just a dry flush draw, thinking he has a lot of fold equity. So that's kind of how I would try to counter that, would be just on drier flops, really try to put some pressure on him.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the differences between long-handed, full ring, PLO, and six max. Do you see the same types of differences between a no-limit hold'em, full ring, and six max game compared to PLO and six max? I mean, how do you have to adjust when you're playing six max?
You have to be so much tighter in those first 3 or 4 positions when playing a full ring game than you really even suspect. You really need to be playing very strong hands because there's so many players left to act behind you. So that's the major difference. And I remember when Stars and Party first started 25-50 games, and they were all 9 or 10 handed, and I just got my butt kicked playing in those. You know, I was like 8 table in them, and I was like, oh, you know, this will be easy. And I was looking at where I was losing all my money, and it was those first 3 or 4 positions I was just playing way too loosely because I was playing probably, 90% of the hands that I would open under the gun in a six max game, and that is just way, way too loose. In a 10-handed game under the gun in, say, no limit hold'em, because it's easier to just give a definitive hand range in no limit hold'em than pot limit Omaha. It's hard to say, okay, I would open this.
Right.
There's some kings you would fold and some pocket jacks you would raise. But in no limit hold'em, you're really even throwing away ace queen offsuit there at a tough table. You're really playing ace king, occasionally a suited connector to make your hand more deceptive, and big pairs.
And when you're getting it in a long-handed PLO game, when you're looking to get money in on a type of board, just from watching some of your videos, you're talking about having a strong hand plus a redraw like top two and a flush draw, something like that. One of the most common questions people don't know about PLO is it's really a game where you can fold the nuts.
Yeah.
Now, in 6-max, what's the difference between, your strength of hand? Does your redraw not have to be as strong when you're getting it in?
So generally, the more players you have, the stronger your hand has to be. And when you have the nuts, poker's a weird thing because you shouldn't even really think of it as you have the nuts straight. You think, I have this much equity in the pot versus my opponent's range of hands. Because there's often times where that equity is below 50% or below 33%, and you're facing a pot-size raise on the turn, and you should fold. But you're thinking, oh, well, I have the best possible hand right now, I should go with it. But that's not really the case. So essentially, the shorter-handed it is, the stronger hand values are. You're up against weaker hands. So when you're playing heads up, if you have the nut straight, you're really never folding it. You're just not. Whereas it's a 10-handed game, if you raise and 9 other people see, or it's a limp pot and 9 people see the flop, and you're sitting there with 6-7 and it's a 5-8-9 board with 2 hearts, and it goes bet, call, you might just want to fold right there.
Right.
And that sounds crazy, but any heart, any board pair, any bigger straight card, you're actually against all those things have less equity. If you looked at their ranges of holdings, say you're up against a nut flush draw, top set, and a bigger straight draw, you're a huge underdog in that spot, and you shouldn't be calling that bet. And definitely not raising, which would be a very common mistake for people to make, would be to raise with the redraw.
How often can you get into situations, especially when you're heads up, when looking to get it all in, where you hold the nut hand, and let's give you an example that you're in position, and the action goes down where a bet and then you raise and the guy 3 bets, or the action goes down in a manner where you're fairly certain that the other guy holds a nut hand. Now, you don't have a redraw, but you decide to call to use a scare card on the river to bluff him off a pot. How often is that?
That happens all the time.
Does it?
That is like the deeper stack PLO can be very interesting in that way. And that's where you have to be deceptive, because there's some opponents I play against that I know 100%, like I raise the turn, they re-raise me. I know they have the nuts straight. So I'm going to call every time, and when they check to me on the river on a flush or a board pairing card, I'm just going to move in on them. And sometimes, they'll have like a redraw with a queen high flush and check call me, but for the most part, it's going to be a very, very profitable play. So that's where you have to be deceptive, and that's where there's times in PLO where you get raised, say I raised with 7, 8, 9, 10, and the flop comes 6, 7, jack, so I have the nut straight with no redraw. I bet the flop, I guess I had bottom 2 pair, but pretend I didn't.
Right.
I have the nut straight, no redraw. I bet the flop, or let's say there's no straight on the flop. Comes deuce 7, 8 rainbow.
Okay, deuce 7, 8, and you hold.
I have 9, 10, ace, 9, 10, ace.
9, 10, ace. Okay.
And I bet the flop, and I get called. Turn brings a jack, and I have the nut straight.
Right.
And I bet the turn again, but there's also a flush draw out there, and he raises me. Well, this is a great spot where you might just want to call against aggressive opponents for a number of reasons. One, they might have the same straight with a better redraw, in which case you're being free rolled. 2, if you re-raise them, they're going to think that they're going to know what you have right there. They're going to say, okay, well, obviously he has the nut straight, and they can play perfectly against you. If they have a straight, they call. If they have a redraw, or if they have something with enough equity, they're going to call. Whereas now if you just call there, you can check to them and let them bluff the rivers if it's a total blank, or you can play it in a deceptive manner if the flush card hits and bluff that to bluff them off the same straight.
Off the same hand.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a lot of things like that you can do where I think calling there is much more profitable than re-raising. And that was when I first started playing PLO. It was like jam all the money in. Okay, great. I have the nut straight. Let's go with it.
Well,
call could be much more profitable.
It's interesting that you bring that up, though, because you seem like a value guy, right? So let's say that you had that hand with ace, ace, 9, 10, where you pick up nut clubs on the turn with your straight, and you get raised on the turn. Are you, again, this is balancing a range, but against typical opponents, are you more likely they're going to 3-bet for value with that strong redraw?
So against a normal opponent who, and again, at 25-50 and lower PLO, most of the time they're just going to have a straight there. They're not going to be like bluffing other weird stuff. Against those opponents, you just put the money in because they're going to have the nut straight a lot of the time and call you, and you've got 20% equity, 22% equity in the pot, and you're free rolling them. Against stronger opponents who are bluff raising there quite a bit because they know you're just betting the card just because they're not going to have the nut straight a lot, then you might want to call and just trap them. So it kind of comes down to your opponents, and you kind of have to balance your hands. You have to think, okay, would this opponent raise 3 jacks on the turn here as almost kind of a semi-bluff thing? Because that's what sometimes happens in PLO. You know, you have top set on a monotone board and you play it super aggressively because you feel like you can fold out a lot of smaller flushes, and if you're up against a nut flush, well, you still got a lot of outs type of thing.
One of the things that I think some people who start off playing PLO that they overvalue is junky aces. Non-connected, non-suited aces. Yeah. When do you fold aces pre-flop? Can we give all the time?
Yeah. I mean, well, usually you want to limp because there's a lot of value in oversetting someone in the deceptiveness. But basically, poker's about pushing your equity, and people don't really get that. They think, okay, I have junky ace, or I have aces. Okay, great, I'm going to raise. But why are you really doing what you're doing? Well, you're raising because you want to push equity and extract value. Why would you raise ace-ace, 7-deuce under the gun when it doesn't have enough equity to do that? Well, you shouldn't. You should probably just be limping. Or would you raise with 4 aces in your hand? Well, probably not. Why not? Because that hand has horrible equity against what your opponents will call you against. You'd be an underdog. You know, you wouldn't want to get it in with 4 aces against like a 9-10 Queen Jack double suited hand because they'd be a favorite against you. So that's why you would fold that hand. In the same way with ace-ace 7-deuce rainbow, you don't want to raise because you're not going to be able to extract value from worse hands. And so it's all about kind of getting value like that.
We had another email here from Keith Clark, and he said, Bart, I've been playing a lot of 1-2 and 2-4 PLO 6 max. What's a solid strategy to play against a total maniac? Let's say a guy with 70-50 stats. Or a guy that's extremely loose passive, say a guy with 80-10 stats.
So against the first opponent, I mean, I remember when I first started playing 10-20 limit, and I got my butt kicked by this aggressive player over such a small sample of hands. And I think that's what a lot of beginning players don't realize is poker takes a while for the outcome to come. And you have to kind of almost be patient and wait for, you know, a spot where you're going to have good equity against their range. And, you know, and it can take a long time, you know. Maybe you're sitting there playing him for 2 hours, and he's winning every pot, hitting every flop, and that can be so frustrating. I mean, I've been there before, and it's really hard to, you know, when they're kind of running good in a way or, you know, connecting with a lot of flops, it's hard to play back against them. So you kind of need to wait until you have a good, strong hand and can extract value. And I guess you have to make sure that you see the big picture. Realize that maybe 2 hours isn't enough for you to, you know, to see the long run, but eventually you will, and you just need to be patient and pick your spots and not get frustrated by this opponent. Against the loose passive opponent who's just calling a lot, you just want to be extracting a lot of value and betting. I mean, essentially all they're doing is increasing their calling range, so you should be increasing your value betting range. And sometimes you get called by a better hand, but for the most part, they're going to be calling you with worse hands.
Now, against that aggro maniac, so I guess is the key to find hands which run, you know, 55-45, or at least 55-45 against their range of opening, which is so wide. You're looking to jam them with value?
You still want a little more equity than that, actually, to be re-raising usually. A standard is about 40% equity I look for.
Okay.
And about 38 out of position. But, you know, there's obviously, you know, sometimes you're raising with a little rundown hand for deception and stuff. But in those spots, you want to you have to realize that you have no fold equity first. That's one thing. When they bet the flop, their jamming frequency is going to be much, much, much higher than other opponents. So you need to take that in when you're deciding what hands to raise the flop with and how often you're bluff raising the flop. So your bluff raises frequency needs to drop dramatically to almost nothing because they're going all in, you know, 50% of their time, and you just can't bluff raise them. And that's the first thing you have to realize. You just have to show them a real hand, and you need a real hand. And then when you get one, you just raise for value and put the money in with top 2, no redraw, and get shown top and bottom or whatever, or a weak draw. So,
And do you still think that there's this discussion about is PLO the game of the future? Where do you think that PLO fits in the whole scheme of everything?
Oh, I think PLO is a beautiful game.
Yeah.
It's a lot more interesting than No Limit Hold'em.
Really?
Flat out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think No Limit Hold'em really needs antes, especially online. It'd be very easy to do, and I don't know why any sites haven't done it. When you play live No Limit, it has antes, and it is such a better game. I mean, it is so much more interesting, and there's a lot of strategy that goes into it. It sounds like, it's not a big deal to have antes, but it really changes the game, and I really wish online they included games with antes.
If they could introduce a game like that.
Yeah, that would be great. I think it would really it's a lot more fun. And PLO doesn't need antes because it has that deceptive factor that you think you can play so many hands when in all actuality you can't. So
Well, I know you've played a little Omaha high-low limit. You ever dabbled in PLO high-low?
High-low?
Yeah.
I did way back when I first moved to Vegas. I lived out there. I just graduated college and said, screw it. I want to go, before I start grad school, I want to go out to Vegas and just be a poker player. And I did play not quite a bit, but a little bit of Omaha high-low. And that was a fun game too. I wish those games would run too. That'd be a fun one to play.
Well, because that's something I've actually gone over on this show. I mean, they don't have big games online, but it gets up to the 2-4 and 5-10 level, and it's definitely an interesting game for sure.
I've seen it run at like 25-50 once in a while, and I sat in that, not really having a great idea of what I was doing. I mean, I kind of had some general strategy, but by no means an expert. And I would love those games to run. I think that would be a great addition.
So if you live, you'd have no problem sitting in like a half high low game, something like that.
Oh, I would have a problem.
Oh, you would.
It would not be. Well, I mean, the thing is, it kind of depends your opponents. If nobody else had ever played high low, sure, I'll sit in it because I have a little bit of experience. But if there's some seasoned players, they're going to crush me at Omaha high low because it's a very different game than just high PLO.
Right.
I mean, it's not even close. I mean, you think it would be close, but it's like comparing limit hold'em to no limit hold'em.
Right.
Or even maybe a bigger, change. So.
Well, thanks for that great PLO strategic discussion. Before I wrap this interview up, there's one other thing I want to ask you. That now that you're so involved with card runners, and now that you actually have basically what is a side business venture, do you feel that it takes pressure off of your poker game in the sense that there's another source of income coming in? But it's interesting because I've tried to dabble this with myself. Do you think that poker players should, invest portions of their bankroll into other things?
Oh, yes. I mean, every poker player, go open a SEP IRA, start saving for retirement. I mean, like all the card runners pros I talk to, I tell them, go do this, go start a SEP IRA, go, start saving money. And they all are. And yeah, I mean, it's just stupid to have all your money sitting online.
Right,
not
right.
getting any interest. Do you know how much money these sites make just off all the money they hold and have in their bank account? I mean, it's crazy.
Or how about people that have their bankrolls in chips in a box too?
It's like, I mean, the casino's not making money there, but I mean, these online poker rooms make a fortune just off the interest of all the money they have. And I mean, it's just stupid of you to not take advantage of that. So you should really have a retirement program set up, talk to a financial advisor. Yeah, it's some money. I was fortunate enough that my dad was one and my mom's real good at investing. And so they kind of give me guidance and stuff. But you really need to start saving for retirement. I mean, it's free money. The government gives you money to save for retirement.
Right.
You might as well take advantage of it. You can take it out if you want to buy a house.
And there's a cap per year, right? Or something like that.
There's a 40K cap, I think, right now on
Right.
SEP IRAs. If you don't make enough, you should start a Roth IRA. I mean, that is just like stealing money. But I don't know the exact number on that, but I think if you make like over 65K a year, you can't put money into a Roth. And I was kind of angry, funny story about that. When I started first working, because you have to actually make money. You can't just, you have to make whatever you defer into a Roth IRA.
Okay.
Or whatever you put into it, you have to make that certain amount. So right now the cap's $3,000, but when I started saving it was $2,000. So when I first got a job, I was like a paperboy or something. My mom every year would give me money to put into the Roth IRA for Christmas. And so I was all saved up for that. And then I had to withdraw money to go on high-stakes poker the first time. And I was talking, and I did it over the phone with Vanguard, and they withdrew from my Roth IRA money. And so there's a 2-month cap when you can put the money back in. So I lost all my Roth IRA money because I didn't realize it had been withdrawn from there, and I didn't put it back into the Roth IRA. And so now I had to pay the big penalties. And all that money I started saving when I was like 16 till I was like 23 was just...
Well, that's one of the advantages of that too, is that those types of funds that charge you a big penalty, right? It keeps you disciplined, where you've got to stay in there, right?
Put the money in, you gotta, unless you're an idiot. So I really dropped the ball on that one. I was pretty mad, but doing other stuff now.
The last time I came up here to talk to you, which wasn't on a show, but you were talking about trying to possibly move out of California because of state income tax. What's next for you? What's your plan over the next couple of years?
I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with that with my friends and stuff, and it's kind of like, I mean, you pay almost 10% state tax in California, and that's rough, but you look around, it's like this, I want to be here. Like, I love Santa Barbara. So it's like, well, life's short, you gotta, I know that's kind of a cliche, but you kind of gotta, sometimes you just gotta say, so what to the money, and you're not going to pay the luxury to live here.
You're not going to be one of these guys that's going to hightail it to Monaco.
It's tempting a lot, but they have the exit tax now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I was considering leaving the first year that I made substantial money. If I had had another passport, I might have left the country and gone to Europe or something. But now that you got to pay an exit tax of like half your net worth or something, I haven't.
And you have to continue to pay U.S. income tax,
for like 10 years or something. Yeah. So it's they're not gonna let you out easily. I think it was the owner of one of those big bookstores, like Borders or Barnes and Nobles. He was like the heir to that fortune, and he basically just walked out of the U.S. with all his money, and the U.S. quickly changed that. So
lucky guy.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just one of those things where it would be more realistic me leaving California, changing residencies, but I don't really want to live anywhere else. So it's like, do I want to spend half the year in another state? I don't know.
God, hopefully not Nevada, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the most reasonable choice. Though,
I
mean, so I don't know. I'm kind of looking at maybe buying a little condo there or something.
Oh, interesting.
With my dad splitting it and then figuring out, I don't know, going from there. So.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for letting me come up here and talk a little poker strategy. I loved it.
No.
It was going to be a great help to me, and I'm sure great help to everybody else. I will be back next week, so stay tuned and come back then for another episode of Cash Plays.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Bart.